Episode number 3.
Still haven't chucked her out.
Ooh.
She's pretty good.
I don't think today comes with a disclaimer, but I think we're having some pretty serious chats today around the idea of service and sacrifice.
Yes.
Okay, so prepare yourselves.
Yeah, and we're going to touch on concepts of abuse. So we just want to say that straight up.
Straight up from the front.
Yeah.
Okay. Monica, welcome back.
Thank you.
Episode number 3. I'm actually going to just let you two take the lead on this, and I'll probably jump in for a slightly inappropriate comment at some stage. But the good thing about that is it lights up on the Discord channel and on all the social media posts as people get annoyed at me. But that's good for interaction. So, Chris, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, sure. Well, so in terms of background to this episode, Monica and I have known each other for, I guess a bit over 12 months now. And we've had a few coffees over that time and explored thoughts and ideas. And one of the things that came up was that, shameless plug, I'm writing a book at the moment. And the book is about the 2 great commands, about what does it look like to love God and love your neighbor. And part of that process has been, what does the Bible actually mean by love? What is it by definition? And so 1 John 4 probably gives the closest answer, which is this is love, not that we loved God, but that God loved us as an atoning sacrifice. So what I say in the book is that we can't, and this is maybe a question that Monica and I can have, we can't sacrifice in that salvific sense. We can't substitute ourselves for another like Jesus substituted. So what's the next best word we can do to demonstrate that Christ-like love? At least in my words that I've put in the book, that I feel reasonably comfortable with putting pen to paper about, is service. So love is a posture of service to God, and it's a posture of service to other people. But when I was kind of excitedly telling Monica about that and the great revelation that I'd come to as an author, and I was going to publish it to the world, she was like, whoa, because for Monica in her world, service is an extremely loaded word. And especially when you're talking about love as a concept, and I'm not just talking about love in the sexual space in my book, but of course it has implications there.
Are you talking about people who work in like sexual service industry? Is that where it's loaded?
No. It may be loaded there, but it's more just like service in terms of servicing your partner. And then, I
was about to make a joke. You should marry an acts of service guy because he's probably going to be a great lover. But that's now you're saying that's completely inappropriate.
Yeah, because there's a difference between, I think, as I think about it, the difference between serving and servicing.
Mm.
Okay, I see it now.
Do you see it now? And
yeah.
the fact that one is almost like a chore.
And can I say, like Monica and I have wrestled this out, and frankly, if you are listening to this episode and you're hoping we're going to have some tight-knit conclusion, you're probably going to be disappointed, because what you've got are 2 deep thinkers wrestling out a concept that's very complicated conceptually, but dare I say it's even more complicated in its application, because the word service is so loaded.
Okay, so the notion of serving your partner, where it's kind of a mutual serving of each other, is actually a really lovely thing.
Yes.
But what you seem to be talking about is the notion of, I'll just service you and give you what you need.
Exactly.
And that can actually be quite a damaging thing. Can I ask a question on that front as we jump into it? Within a relationship, oftentimes there's 2 different libidos. Sometimes one partner's ready to go every day, all day, and then there's another partner who's not necessarily interested in the same level. That would feel like a common place where this notion might find itself taking hold, right? Like,
yes.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure, let's do it and get it done with.
That's exactly.
Because you're just insatiable on this stuff, right?
Yes.
And I say that as a fair comment, is that I don't think that's unusual.
And I would also caution that with, I think our culture exaggerates that a lot too, which is in itself part of the problem. Okay. Is that there's this idea, and I'm just going to put it out there, that men are hypersexual and women are not, and just the objects of men's desire, and are there to manage this hypersexuality of guys, which, before marriage looks like modesty and shutting down their own sexuality, and after marriage looks like giving them what they need, giving them what they want, and making sure they're doing a good job of that so they don't go astray. So it's sort of, I don't know.
And you're saying that's not true scientifically?
Yeah, that's right. And it actually also...
So that's actually not true?
No.
See, this is the first I'm hearing about. I've assumed that, yes, scientifically, men have more libido than women across the board.
Well, I think men are more easily aroused in terms of, even when you think about it biologically, not only do they have 10 times more testosterone, which drives them towards it, but also from an evolution, from a psychologically evolutionary perspective, women hold all the reproductive risk. So for them to be intersex so quick is not even wise from a safety element.
Because I might get impregnated.
I hold all of that risk.
Wow.
So of course, the bodily function around arousal is slower and requires safety and context. And, the guys, they're like, why do I have to talk to my wife before we have sex? It's like, well, actually, subconsciously, she needs the safety before you go into this vulnerable space with her. But it's not that women aren't sexual.
Yeah.
They're very sexual and they do have desire. It looks different to men. However, we almost are, it's like, but the way we're kind of framing it shuts down women, shuts down their agency, shuts down the fact that they may have desire, and it becomes all about servicing or serving or kind of managing men's desire. And so their sexuality becomes always in reference to men's sexuality.
Because I would imagine that would put a woman who does have a high level of sexual activity or desire, that almost invalidates that gender role that's put on her. And she's a bit of a floozy,
exactly,
potentially.
And often there's a lot of shame and stigma attached to a woman who does. And even for women that do start to feel sexual, it's also how do you start to own your own sexuality without stepping into the objectification frame which they're resisting, which is I'm there for your purpose and your and servicing of you. So there's this real pull. Like if I wear lingerie because it makes me feel sexy, it suddenly becomes yours now that you're enjoying it. And now my sexuality is no longer about me enjoying being in lingerie. It's about you and your enjoyment of me, and now I'm an object. And there's this sort of funny tension between not having this sense of agency in sex and it suddenly becoming about my sexuality being in reference to yours now. And I'm noticing that to an extreme really sets up massive dysfunction in relationships. Particularly when it's in this frame of service and self-sacrifice.
Okay, so let's zoom above that again, and let's go back to that moment when I excitedly shared the journey that I'd been on, and your heart kind of was like, what?
Yes.
Why?
Yeah. So and I just finished listening to this sermon myself on, I think it was Philippians 2 verse 3 and Ephesians 5 verse 2, which is all about valuing others above yourselves, even
imitating Christ's humility.
Yeah, giving yourself up for others, it's sacrifice to God, And so when you're faced with other people's needs, this is what was taken out, in the sermon.
Yeah.
Don't be selfish, serve other people. That's how you actually shine God's love into the world. And as I was thinking about all my clients that were kind of doing this in a sexual way, like relinquishing their body and their desire and pleasure and making it all about meeting their partner's sexual needs out of a kind of duty or obligation, that this is how they love their partner. Even though they don't want it. So coming back to what you were saying, Duncan, about different libidos, even though I don't want sex, I don't feel like sex, I'm going to, and maybe even sex is painful for me, I'm going to push through and I'm going to relinquish my pleasure and what's important for me so that I can be loving and caring and other person centered for my partner. And that's fine, except that the resulting outcome is deep shame, deep physical dysfunction. So the body eventually sort of shuts down. You get this, vaginismus. The whole body is almost like closing up to the constant pain that this person's having to endure.
Because there's essentially nothing in it for you at that point.
Exactly. And then there's also deep shame for her. That there's often like shame on so many levels. Shame that she should be enjoying this thing that everyone's telling her is a gift. Shame at ignoring her body's own preferences and not being protective for herself. Shame at even a despising that she starts to have towards her husband who happens to be enjoying it at her expense. And that's just her shame, but then there's his as well of like not actually fully being desired in the space and knowing that. Shame at not knowing how to pleasure her. shame at kind of the whole space of just kind of the way in which that, because the way that she usually will push through it is just, okay, let's just get this over and done with.
Mm-hmm.
Tick that off the list, and I'll feel
hope
deep
he doesn't
relief.
ask again tomorrow.
And hope and that is just all around bad.
Because what's interesting about that is the concepts that you just started with in that monologue around serving the other. Would I go as far to say, even if there's nothing in it for me in that moment, I'm probably still okay with. But then as you start to, something happens in that journey that you've just taken us on that distorts. Like I want to find a way to redeem the language of service rather than dismiss it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've been married 20 years. I feel like at least somewhere in my journey with my partner, I've had that moment where it's like, I'm not really into it, but let's do it anyway. I've had that moment before.
Mm-hmm.
So there must also be a crossover where, like, occasionally it happens and that's okay, but it shouldn't become a regular occurrence, right?
Exactly. And I think that
Sorry, just trying to justify my high-low bit.
Well,
high libido.
Is it okay for it occasionally to be what Duncan just said, in your opinion?
Well, I, as a sex therapist, I'm always about mutual pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually not about, well, let me just sort of give into this, and it's like, why don't we put the work in to find where is our yes today for both of us?
Yes. Okay.
And that takes a little more effort, and I get that. And people don't always have the energy at the end of the day to find that. But I, as a sex therapist, I feel obliged to encourage that.
Yes.
That actually, if you're not into it, it's not just a matter of no or yes, but what is it about tonight that you're not into, and what are you imagining for yourself, and could we change that to make it manageable? So if you come home and you're tired and if someone says you want to have sex tonight, it's like people have a picture of what's involved. I have to have a shower, and then I have to put on my best, and for guys it's like I have to initiate, and then I've got to do all this stuff, and I've got to get her off, and it's like an hour thing, and I've got 3 kids screaming in the room, and no, that's the answer is no. But it's like, it's so much more nuanced than that. It's like, well, maybe we could be up for some intimacy, and what would you like, and what are you up for, and what am I up for, and where do we find that space that we're both willing to wholeheartedly go to, rather than, well, let's just push through and one of us isn't into it, but hey, the other one gets it anyway, kind of thing.
I feel like so much of this, and frankly 3 episodes in, so much of what you've been talking about, as I've been processing it all, comes down to communication. Like the link between communication and sexual health seems to be very strongly linked.
Yeah, it is. And I actually think there's one of the extra pieces. I'm talking about it out loud. I think the answer is in agency. So it's not that it's a bad thing to say yes when you are wanting to kind of honor your partner or give them a gift, that you're willing to go there. But there's this quote that it's almost like, if you can't say no, then your yes is meaningless. If a person has no agency, or feels like they have no agency, and that their duty is to serve, which so many women feel, which is this, like, to be a good woman, I need to sacrifice even my sexuality, then there's no choice or agency in the act.
Yes.
It's like, I need to do this. And that's the difference. Is one is, I can say no and it's going to be okay, or I can say yes and it's going to be okay. The other is, I can't say no, it would be bad, and therefore I'm obliged to do this like a chore. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, really helpful, but that's as I'm talking out loud.
That's very helpful. So do you think that theoretically, in a perfect world, is service the right way to look at this, but it's become so loaded? Or is service not even the right way to think about sexual relationships?
Yeah, I think the challenge, I think one of the biggest challenges is also, what if it's not mutual? Yeah. That's when we start to set up these spaces of abuse that I'm worried about. Is, let's say you're serving, and I think this is a bigger pastoral question as well, is what happens when one person in a relationship is serving in a way that is a choice-based service of love, but the other person is not. Mm-hmm. What is your move? Do you do you just keep doing it and hope that it changes the other person? Do you endure that abusive, imbalanced relationship, or do you, and I think a lot of people take it to believe that.
Yeah.
But I actually think maybe the most loving thing to do is confront the dysfunction.
So this is obviously something you feel passionately about this, because you're seeing this pattern time and time again in your work, particularly amongst people of faith. Is that correct?
Yes, because I will say something like, let's fight for mutuality. And it's like, no. I know I need to give my husband this. And I'm
because
not
just
really...
as Christ laid his life down for me, I need to
right.
lay my life down for my husband.
That's right. He even gave his body for us. And so I'm giving my body over to my partner for his pleasure. Even though I could go my entire life, never have sex again, I'm doing this to kind of maintain the marriage. And the problem with that is she's missing out on all that sex could be for her. And she's kind of almost giving away her agency, giving away her own sexual desire, or the even possibility that she could feel it, by saying, well, like, and then coming back to the unity, how is he going to enjoy it?
Yeah,
really?
I'm putting myself in the man's shoes there. I don't want my wife to feel that
right.
way.
Why would you want to go into that space? It's almost offensive.
Yeah.
You're going into a space, and then you start this whole, the guy might say, I don't want to have sex if it's going to be this kind of sex. And then you get into this space of, well, am I not good enough? That even that I'm sacrificing and it's painful for me, I'm still giving this to you. That's still not enough. You still want more from me, and then you used to get these like real relational, resentful dynamics occurring.
So you have to create a safe space. You have to then start to form dialogue around it, which you may never have had. Do you know?
Yes.
I think that is quite a challenging, I wonder if all of this stems from something that happens way earlier on within Christian circles that leads to this, is that oftentimes sexuality all the way up till marriage is talked about in hushed tones behind closed doors as a forbidden type thing. And you go from forbidden to overnight liberation and permission. And there's no scaled demonstration of appropriate conversations about sex. So if you don't, we can edit this out if this is inappropriate, but in a bag over there is a crocheted penis and a beautifully handcrafted vulva, explaining where all the different significant points are on the male and female sexual organs. Now, we had it out before, having a good giggle, and we were talking back and forward about a whole bunch of different things. But that felt healthy and not lewd. And I don't think I had ever had that conversation until, I read a sealed sexual book on the clitoris, where I felt like I actually started to understand some of the nuts and bolts of it. And then within that book too, also some of the things that need to take place to bring a person to a place where they are interested in that, right? And that was a lot longer journey than I anticipated. I'm a gun, pull the trigger and it'll go off. My wife is a diesel engine. We have to bring it up to temperature, but it can probably run for a lot longer than I can.
Yeah, that's right.
If a fair assessment of some differences there. But no one ever pulled out a crocheted penis in a newlyweds course and said, let's talk through some stuff. And I feel like that actually creates a space where you can have dialogue. And that's part of the stuff that you're undoing, is you're undoing years and years of awkward conversations around sex where it's I want, you want. And what you're trying to reestablish is this beautiful we want. And we want means that we need to negotiate on some stuff and talk about some stuff and create some frameworks which have never existed because I've never known a way of having a healthy dialogue about sex.
That's right. And what if you enter that marital space and one person wants and the other one doesn't? There's no wanting at all, and that's the challenge. Is how do you even get the we want in the first place before you even go to the step of looking at the diagrams and the models? Is even how do you want the want for some people? Some people come in and say, I just want to want it, but I don't. And that I think is an even earlier issue around how we understand sexuality before marriage in the church.
Okay.
Which is like dangerous. Shut it down. Don't think about it. Don't awaken desire before it's ready. And so everybody, particularly women, like I said, because of this idea of this very kind of old sort of purity culture kind of remnant, that woman is responsible for a male sexuality in some form and it's dangerous for them, for these hypersexual beings, that it's almost like they're already shut down by the time they enter marriage. They've gotten so good at shutting down desire, numbing out any feeling of, and then the most common thing I hear is, I was told not to even think about it, not to explore it, but then the minute I got married, I had to flip this switch and suddenly be super sexual for my partner.
And be really good
at it. And it's gone. Like, and there's nothing to sex that I'm really wanting anymore. Like, because I don't even know how to, so a lot of my work is actually slowing it down, helping women feel into their bodies again, because they're so good at shutting that down.
So take us through that journey where you get the, let's say a couple come in and this is happening.
Yeah.
And I guess behind my question is, let's assume someone's listening to this podcast and they're like, oh my gosh, you've just described my marriage.
Yeah.
Where does the unpicking of that begin?
You can begin it in so many places. You know, sometimes I even start, if someone's coming to me and saying, I do not want sex for the rest of my life, just quietly, you know, in the individual session, I'll be like, well, what kind of sex is it that you never want to have? Talk to me about that. And then they explain what's happening. And I'm like, I don't think anyone would want to have that kind of sex in their life either. So now start to talk to me about what you envisage sex could be. Like what, you know, I even sometimes send them off to find pictures that represent in everyday sort of society something that is a beautiful vision of sex for them, but in a visual sense. And they come back and they have pictures of waterfalls and things, you know, the rainbows and, you know, it's like, okay, let's talk about what this could mean for you. What could sex mean for you other than just serving your partner? And then it's sort of, and even if there's 90% of them that's not keen, I'm like, let's work with the 10% of you that's just curious about what this could mean for you to enjoy this part of your life with your partner. And it starts there. And it's that curiosity and that, you know, even sort of dropping into their body and starting to be aware of, well, what are the erotic cues in the environment that I'm actually totally ignoring? And are there actually things out there that do sort of stimulate or awaken something in me? Is there a book that I read and there's a section there that sort of stirs something in me? Or is there a scene on TV that I keep coming back to on, you know, a movie that I just love? There's something that, you know, and how do you bring that into the relationship actually? So you're starting to help them get back in connection with something that they disconnected from a long time ago because it felt dangerous.
So when you communicate, for someone who's struggling in like confidence, communicating in front of a crowd, you get them to stand in power stance. Do you know?
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about?
You're saying like almost embody it, but like fake it until you make it.
Yeah. So you hands on hips, legs apart, stand up proud, hands in the air. Like there's all these different stances that you can adopt to allow yourself to believe that you're courageous, right? Is that I feel like for somebody who has shut down that, it's almost like learning the ability for sexy stance. Like, you know, I don't know how to phrase it because it's a new concept, but like for a person to gain confidence in speaking, you've got to allow them to stand in a way that exudes confidence. They're not hunched over, they're not closed up, but you start to open everything up and chest out and, you know, like power stance. Is that I feel like part of what you're saying with that 10% is like become curious about your sexy again, right? And find those ways where you can, you know, because it's a little thing, just standing a different way, but it allows you to feel some of that confidence before you go and speak to someone. Is it's like learning some little sexy may actually that lead to the rainbow waterfall conversation, but you have to it's a foreign idea, sorry, but like how do you learn sexy again?
Yeah, and I think that's most of the work. And I'm hesitant about the word sexy because when women hear sexy, they think sexy for a man. And once again, their sexuality becomes referenced around what is sexy for a guy.
No, but sexy is for you, right?
And sexy is for you. And so that in itself might not look like the male version of courageous. It may not.
And that's my question. Is,
chest out. It may actually. So it's really helping people find what is their expression of being a sexual being that makes them step into this space of feeling kind of empowered within themselves to go there, that is uniquely about them. And that's why I'm saying within the Christian space, there's so much other person-centeredness that it's really hard for particularly women to step into what they would say a selfish space of their own sexual feelings and sexuality. And there's even a, skill of what I call taking pleasure for yourself, right? That is touching someone else for your pleasure. Massive skill that very few women can do, which is so important because even the guy loves knowing that his body alone can bring her pleasure just in being, right? And so once again, there is this beautiful mutuality that can occur if she's taking. It's not all selfish, but
because her taking is an affirmation that there's something worth taking.
Exactly. And it means that he can actually give, right? His giving is landing if she's able to take like his body. And so I think that there is this inability to take and even to receive pleasure. This is the other thing, is they'll be sitting in this space of receiving and feeling very guilty. Like, I don't know, I should be doing this to you. I should be doing something for you. I can't just lie back here and receive pleasure. So they actually shift into what is more of an allowing headspace of, well, then I guess I'll just allow you to do this and think to myself, you're enjoying this. It's actually about you in this moment. And they won't even be able to stay psychologically in the receiving bit of this is for me.
Do you know it's not funny, but where my mind goes, it's a bit funny, is the meal roster at church. Everyone is happy to cook for the meal roster when someone needs it. But when you're the one on the receiving end of the meal roster, it's really confronting. It's like, I don't think my needs are legitimate enough. Like, there's someone over there that has way more need for the meal than me. Like, it is... in the ecosystem of Christianity,
we are so wired different. when I get meals, I'm like, can I not have spaghetti bolognese and lasagna?
That's because you're a bad human.
I'm like putting in requests.
My point being, everyone talks about giving, but it's actually hard to receive. Yes. But receiving is an opportunity for someone else to give.
Exactly, and that's what we're really called to do. And if we don't, and if we just constantly in that space of giving, then it starts to become this sort of duty that is where you don't know how to say no either to, you're just always giving to other people.
You're cooking the meal roster begrudgingly after a certain amount of time.
Yeah, and that just opens you up for a burnout or abuse if people are like, sure, keep going for it.
Yeah. Right? Can I ask on that? Because you're speaking a lot about the female perspective, which I'm learning, it's really helpful.
Chris has got 14 pages of notes right now.
As a male, sometimes it's a little scary to hear these conversations because what if I'm being accidentally abusive? Like, men in culture, I think, are portrayed a certain way, the buffoon or the oaf or the, like, I guess, if there's Christian men listening to this, how do I not be that husband that, or is it about, does it start with the wife's internal narratives that she's telling herself? Or are there things that I'm doing knowingly or unknowingly that I'm suddenly dabbling in abusive behaviours and I don't know that I'm doing it? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also about framing of your own framing of sex. Yeah. Like, I think there's a lot of couples that collude around that idea, well, sex is a need for me as a guy, and I get blue balls, and if I'm not getting sex, then that I'm going to get it from somewhere else, right? There's this sort of, you can really start to absorb these total false concepts in society. I mean, no one's going to die for lack of sex.
Yeah.
And it's not a need, it's a want, it's a preference, it's and this idea that if you don't service me, or if I don't have regular sex, and I'm going to explode, or I'm going to have to go elsewhere, or my eyes are going to look elsewhere, is you're excusing yourself, like you're giving yourself a free pass of which is something that's like, actually, no, you're responsible for managing your own sexuality. Actually, it's not her job.
You're just being ill-disciplined.
That's right. Yeah. Take account for that and go in and figure out what's going on.
Like, so that absolution of responsibility is where abusive behaviors start to.
I think so.
That's the beginning of it.
Yeah, and then it's almost like, well, this is all too hard.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to take what I can, and I'm just, she's putting out. I know she's not totally into it, but. Is better than nothing. And that's when you start to get, and both people are really colluding around it. It's not just one person's issue. And that's what I always say is it's a system problem. It's an issue with the system. And there's something in there that's sort of, it's partly her, it's partly you, it's partly what you're not saying to each other. It's, but I just want to highlight it that this exists very much so in the Christian couples that I see.
So how do you have good dialogue there? I mean, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think it looks like people having real conversations about what's going on. And I'm not saying straight after sex. It's a bad time to have it. Right?
The review session.
So, that's right. And when everyone's vulnerable and but I think there is a place for after sex, maybe the next day, saying like, how could that have been better? Or what was one moment for that you really enjoyed? Or what do you think is going on here? What can we do to make this work for both of us? It's just opening up that space to have that conversation and to be curious. And there's heaps of resources online about good questions to ask each other. I think there's even a Gottman card deck, which is a free app, and it's got these like spicy, mild, moderate, spicy questions to ask your partner around just how are you going on that front? What does an orgasm feel like for you? Or what are there any parts of your body that you don't enjoy me touching that I should know about? And what are the parts, was there anything from that previous experience that really worked for you? And how do I maximize, like get better at that? Or is there anything you want to explore? Or, it's inviting equal contribution to encourage mutuality and also encourage agency, sexual agency for both people in the relationship.
So is that question then, last night you didn't seem like you were really into it. Do you feel like you have permission to say to me, I'm not really up for it tonight?
Yeah.
Like that's a warranted question then, kind of.
Yes. And I think that's a really good point is people need to know how to say no and people need to know how to hear no in relationships around this topic. And if you can't, then it totally starts to go into the duty obligation space of gritting my teeth. I don't know how to say no. If I say no, they're going to explode. So it's easier to say yes. And so being able to hear it and say it is one of the first skills I teach in therapy.
What this is making me think, and I'm biased because I want to find a way to do service language still in the midst of all of this.
Yes.
I want to propose an idea to you and I want you to see what you think. Not just in this episode, but in the last 3 episodes, we've spoken about, and you even introduced the fact that people come to you with sexual issues, but behind that, there's deeper things going on. It's communication, it's family of origin, and sex kind of can become the flashpoint for all of that. If we stick with the service terminology for a second, it almost sounds like it's if you're just thinking about it in the physical space, in the moment of intercourse, you've missed the whole point. The intercourse is almost the manifestation of the spirit of service that you already have in the relationship. So when Duncan says, I read a book about this to understand it, to me, that's an act of service. Okay, you can go, he was being a selfish kid because he wants to know. But I don't think that's the heart behind that book, reading that book. You're time poor, you've got kids, but you're going to sacrifice 5 to 6 hours to read a book to understand better something that you don't understand. People who take the time and the money to come and see you, Monica, that is in and of itself an act of service to the other, because what they're really doing is they're fighting for relational health, ultimately demonstrating in sexual health. So my proposition to you, to see if you agree or disagree, is before we think about service in the bedroom, it's about service to the relationship, of which the bedroom is a natural outflowing of that relational health that you have with the other person.
Yeah.
And that service is not about giving someone else an orgasm. It's investing in the relationship, whether that's be reading a book, taking someone out on a date, whatever it is, cleaning the dishes. It's a disposition that says, I need to work out how to make this relationship the best one it can be, and that's going to be costly on my part to make that investment.
Yeah, costly and not so costly because of this concept in relational life therapy, which is the modality I teach, is called enlightened self-interest. Is that you're in the system, mate. Like, as in,
there's something in it for you too.
Yeah, if you bless your partner, guess what? You're in the system. It's going to come back to you, and you'll be blessed.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it can feel costly, but when you really stop and think about what you're doing, you're one. You're a unit, and if they're happy, you are too. And so, but I agree. I think it's about this serving into a space that is a mutual space, that you're owning that mutually. And that investment may not look like sexually specific, but it's a broader relational investment that also plants, it's the soil in which sex grows in anyway. It's the foundations. If your relationship is healthy, then chances are sex is going to be easier or not. It's not guaranteed, but at least you'll have a good foundation for even dealing with those sexual issues if your relationship is healthy. And so I think, but I keep coming back to, well, what is the challenge if one person isn't?
Yeah, so is that possible do some people just not have sex drive or as much? Like, I don't understand the science behind that component to it. Like, what I'm hearing is that there's a way to unlock libido.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming that for some people, that's going to be a much greater uphill battle than for others.
Yeah, and I think...
But is that true? Is that correct, what I've just said?
I think, there is, asexuality in our context. I don't think it's as common as people might think it is. I think 90% of people that say they're asexual actually realize once they start working in a space that it's they do have a sexual drive. It's just that they haven't unlocked it. But I think, the challenge is around... I think it's also about what you're chasing after. Is it sex? Is it intercourse as the world defines it? Or is it just a mutual space, a corner of your life that is embodied pleasure for one another? And really just staying focused on how do we give each other this sort of pleasure in an embodied way together, that in a way that works for us. But I think when it comes to service, I think what I was saying more around the question is, what happens when you might be doing what you think is the right service towards other, and the other person isn't leaning in to the same extent? How do you what do you think is the biblical mandate there? That's my and we may not have an answer.
I'm not stalling, but can you genuinely ask that last question again? I'm not fully understanding it.
Yeah, so when you have, how we're talking about mutuality, leading, you guys are good guys, you're gonna lean in and invest into your relationships, and you're reading the books and you're doing the work because you want to invest into the relational space. What is the move of a person that's doing that, but they're married or they're connected into somebody that the spouse is not in that space?
Yeah, I got you.
And do they keep serving in a sacrificial way, or do they hold back?
It's like, it kind of taps into covenant theology, does the covenant still stand if someone else is not engaging in the covenant themselves?
Yeah.
Well, you have to have that conversation, don't you? If we come back to dialogue, I seem to be into this a lot more than you. Can I just, is it a headspace thing? Is it seasonal life thing? What am I missing here? Do you know? Is it a me thing? Is it a you thing? Because the answer to that question is going to be varied, isn't it? It's a seasonal life. We've got little kids and I'm just not there yet.
Unless you're married to a narcissist who's
totally
doesn't care.
Oh, I just don't care.
I
just really
don't care
okay. So that's a much different thing to tackle, right? Is that I feel like if you're having healthy conversations around sexuality, my affirmations of how I find you sexy, do they resonate with you? What I'm doing to say you're sexy, are you receiving that? Because sometimes it's just you're not speaking the same language. Sometimes it's a seasonal thing. I'm just not feeling it. It's maybe it's tied to depression, maybe it's tied to anxiety, and all those things just mean I'm just a bit detached right now. And then the other thing is I've just never felt it. And so I've just been doing it because you seem to really like it. It's like, oh, okay, well, now we've got to have a lot longer conversation to help unpack that, because I really want it to be enjoyable, as opposed to, I don't care. I just, as long as I'm getting it, I'm happy, right? They're two very different things, aren't they?
They are. That's what, yeah.
And if you haven't created a space where you can talk about it, then you're never going to know that. Or if the space doesn't feel safe enough that you can get to, no, I'm just not into it 5 days a week like you're into it. Like, I'm probably into it once a week when the mood's right, but I don't feel like I can say that, because you become a belligerent twat every time I say no. That needs to happen in a safe space where you feel like, and that's where I think you become really great, is that you can mediate that. Because I would get a sense that there's a bunch of dudes who are like, yeah, why are you ever into it? And they get angry about it. And it's like, oh, I don't want to bring it up anymore. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, part of that is emotional intelligence, to be able to say, you're going to feel that, but there's a way to feel that in a positive way, to go, okay, well, I need to understand where my partner's coming from. And that's part of sacrifice. Sacrifice doesn't feel like the right word. You're enlightened.
Enlightened self-interest.
Your enlightened self-interest is to figure out a way to better express that. If you want good sexual encounters with your partner more regularly, then your enlightened self-interest would be when you hear a no that makes you frustrated. Learning the ability to rephrase that in a way that goes, oh man, I'm a bit bummed about that tonight, but totally, it's, I want us both to be into this. And so that's not a problem. I totally love you and totally understand that tonight's not the night, and I'm okay with that. That's a learned skill.
That's right.
Right? So I think we come back to it. Sorry, I don't want to conclude it, but I'll just have a crack at it. Service, when there's a sense of mutuality to it, is a healthy thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where we feel like both parties are participating equally in the view of getting to a place where we both can receive pleasure the way that we'd like to receive pleasure. Thumbs up. Servicing, where it starts to feel really one-directional, where I'm just putting out because this guy won't shut up or won't stop or won't keep nagging me, he's a sex pest, is unhealthy. And we don't want to stay a long time in that space. But to move through it, we have to create a safe space where we can have dialogue about this stuff honestly. And it's not an attack on the individual, but it's a desire for fullness for both parties. Is that fair?
Love it. Yeah.
I completely, I want to start by saying yes to everything you just said. And, not but, and I'm assuming where Monica's coming from, correct me if I'm wrong, you see instances where there are systemic abuses happening, and your question is, to play the gender stereotype for a sec, what does a woman who is on the receiving end of abusive behaviour from a man who has no contrition, repentance, or sees no problem in the way that he's responding, what does it mean to continue to serve him in that very extreme example? Is that...
Yeah, because sometimes people don't feel like they can have that conversation for various reasons, or they're not with someone who's good at communicating, or someone that is very closed off, or,
Yeah. I would say to that language, it's so absolutely yes to everything Duncan's just said. And I think my hope is, and this could be really naive, my hope is that with enough training and encouragement, most guys, even if they're not naturally there, can get to what Duncan's just outlined for us. I would like to think that we don't want to give up quickly on that vision of mutuality, of communication, of service. Do I also think there are instances when no matter how well you cultivate something, whether it's psychological disorders or just a really, really hard heart, that someone can just not change and therefore staying in that pattern is actually opening yourself up for abuse? Yes, I do think that's possible. And I think through, when the Sadducees asked Jesus about divorce, and Jesus permits divorce, but he also says it's the far from ideal. So for me, there is a line here where, no, I don't think the language of service is saying you keep opening yourself up for abuse after abuse after abuse. At the same time, we want to get there very slowly and give it a red hot go to give what Duncan has outlined, see where we go, and maybe you're just really trying to get blood from a stone. Then you're looking at the least worst solution in a particular situation. And look, I have pastored women into decisions to divorce, so I do have that. I don't want to keep enabling patterns of abuse. I just want to make sure we've given every opportunity possible to check that it's not a complete and utter narcissist, but it's a fumbling guy whose heart's become a little bit hard over time, needs a bit of reframing and retraining to work out what mutuality looks like again. That's what I would say about it.
Yeah.
We need to be careful, and we need to give outs in inverted commas, because this is an imperfect world and sin has broken even institutions of covenant between humans. But we just want to make sure, because I have also seen people jump to that, I think, a bit too quickly, because we are more enlightened to these things. Maybe 50 years ago, adultery was the only thing that enabled the breaking of a covenant. Now we understand abuse a little bit more. And I want to be really sympathetic and open to that. And at the same time, I don't want to flip the pendulum to go there too quickly, when a little bit of work could have avoided that happening. That's probably where I would balance that.
Yeah.
But I acknowledge that I'm more naive to you in that fact. And I've seen it as a pastor, but I haven't seen it to the same level that you have in your work.
Yeah. No, thanks. I think that's really helpful. I think something that is sort of churning around in my head is just that idea of I think about Paul and a few other kind of quotes in the Bible that talks about us being free, set free to serve others, and the freedom coming first, of feeling like there is agency there and a freedom, and then out from that place of freedom and agency and ability to say no, and then we actually give ourselves to each other. And that feels different to a kind of duty obligation frame, or feeling stuck, or feeling like there's no way forward. And so that's sort of, I think there's biblical precedence there as well around this whole area.
That's helpful, and I agree with that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. We're going to wrap it up there. Next week, going to address some issues around pornography. To wrap it out, Monica, you've been fantastic.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
See you again next week.
Now I need to do a bathroom break.